Hello everyone, I am Grandmaster Renato Quintiliano, and this is our series Study the Classics. Today, I will show you a nice game by Vassily Smyslov against Kerez, two very strong players. Smyslov was the 7th world champion, he was the first player to win a match against Botvinnik. It's true that later Botvinnik regained the title in the rematch, but anyways, Smyslov was the first to beat him, and I really like Smyslov's games because they are very they we have a very harmonious feeling studying them, and he manages to show his ideas pretty clearly in his games. So this game was played against Kerez, who is also a very strong player, a legend. Actually, Kerez is one of my favorite players, but unfortunately here he was outplayed by Smyslov, who also happens to be one of my favorite players. So let's see this game. This game was played in the World Championship tournament, played in 1948. It was the tournament organized after Alekhini's death to determine who would be the next world champion, and it was won by Botvinnik. But also Smyslov, Kerez, and many other strong players from that time were playing. So yeah, this game started with d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, very classic position. Queen's Gambit declined, bishop e5, then c6, and here e3 was played, knight bd7. Now Smyslov plays c takes d5, e takes d5. We have the typical exchange variation, very common at all levels, from amateurs to top level grandmasters. Everyone likes this variation because it has many interesting ideas, and it's also a nice practical option to fight for an advantage. Here I could give a small advice, which I tell often to my students and other players, that it's usually useful for white to wait for knight bd7 before taking on d5. It's not that c takes d5 couldn't be played here. It was possible to take on d5 immediately, but this is just a practical tip for you, because white can play some other useful moves while waiting for knight bd7. But okay, if you want to play the exchange variation, you can take more or less at any moment, like after knight c3, knight f6, for example. But I noted that watching games by other strong players, that they usually wait for knight bd7 before taking, so this can be useful in practice to remember. But okay, there are lots of specific theory here, of course. C takes d5, e takes d5, and we have the typical Carlsbad structure. This is the so-called Carlsbad structure, which is very famous in these lines. So bishop d3, bishop e7, and knight f3. Another brief observation from the opening is that queen c2 should be considered nowadays a more precise move order, because white keeps the chance of developing this knight to e2 or f3, so you keep your position flexible. But especially, in my opinion, because after knight f3, here black has knight e4, simplifying a little bit the position, because here black is able to force to exchange one pair of pieces, so maybe that makes easier to equalize. Although white still has some ideas to fight for an advantage, but I think this move, I even recommend this move in my database for modern chess. So I think this move is enough to equalize with correct play. So that's why queen c2 looks a bit more precise. But Kerez didn't take the chance, so he played the castle, and here queen c2 already avoids knight e4. Rook e8, castles, and now he plays knight f8. We can see that knight e4 doesn't work now, because after bishop takes e4, the h7 pawn is hanging, so bishop takes g5 is met by bishop takes h7, and if they takes e4, knight takes, defending the bishop, so white wins a pawn, simply. But instead he plays knight f8, a very, very common move here. In this position, black has a very, very famous plan to exchange his bad bishop, the light squared bishop, which can be black's worst piece in this structure, because the pawns are fixed on light squares, and often this bishop becomes a strategic problem for black. So the plan is to play g6, knight e6, knight g7, and the bishop f5. This is the main idea, so black can get rid of this bad bishop and keeps a solid position. Well, here Smyslov goes for a very famous plan, which starts with rook b1, rook a2 b1. So he plans to play with b4 and b5. This is known as the minority attack, because white doesn't have a majority on the queen side. We have 2 pawns here against 3, so it's black who owns majority on this flank. But anyway, white intends to attack on the queen side. The idea is it's very simple and yet very effective. White wants to play b4, b5, and then provoke a pawn weakness on black's structure on the queen side. When this pawn reaches b5, it's always a difficult question for black how to play, because if black takes on b5, then the d5 pawn becomes isolated. And if black waits for b takes c6, then after b takes c6, he still has weak pawns on the queen side. As we will see, this is the plan that makes white achieve a positional advantage in the game. So rook a b1, and here Kerez played knight g6. He tries to find an active setup for black, looking for chances on the king side, but as the game shows, this plan really doesn't work. I think nowadays a5 is a popular move, and also other moves like bishop e6, for example. I remember a recent game by mine, a few years ago, with this move. Then I played b4, a6, a4, and my opponent replied with rook c8, which is totally playable. The idea is that if b5, black can play, for example, a takes b5, a takes and c5. So the rook becomes active on the c file. This is the point. Well, this is one possible plan for black, but this is how we play nowadays, understanding the positional dangers of black's position, and also having the advantage of having studied games like this, in which things went completely wrong for black. Instead, Kerez played knight g6. Oh, here it's also worth mentioning that knight e4 can be considered, because now the h7 pawn is defended, but here bishop f4 is also an interesting idea for white, keeping the pressure on e4 and preserving this bishop as well. But okay, the game went knight g6, then b4, and now bishop d6 was played by Kerez, still looking for some active setup, but as we will see, this plan is just wrong, is a bad conception by him. Instead, I think a6 was a better try. Of course, white would continue with a4, reinforcing the idea of renewing the threat of b5, but the point is that, let's say, if we follow the same path as in the game bishop d6, b5. Now a takes, b5, a takes, black has got rid of one weak pawn, and the rook can be active on the a file. So when you have to defend this kind of position, it's important to have as few weaknesses as possible. So if you manage to exchange pawns that could be weak at some point, it's a good thing. And at some point, Eventually, black will have to defend this position after b takes c6, b takes c6, but he will have only one weak pawn. In the game, he has more than one weakness. So bishop d6, then b5, and here bishop d7. This also, he's trying to activate this bishop now, but let's see, b takes c6, and the bishop takes. Here, I think Kerez thought the bishop would be well placed, defending both pawns, d5 and b7, and also keeping the e4 square under control to prevent ideas like e4, for example. But still, it was better to play b takes c6, because this bishop, it's of course a bad bishop, it's not a beautiful piece here, but this bishop can be very good to defend the weakness on c6, and also sometimes it can go to g4 or another square, becoming more active and trying to create some ideas to disturb white's position. But he probably played the bishop takes 6, considering all these factors, that the bishop could defend the pawns, keep the e4 square under control, and also he has the open c file to the rook, so he could play with he could try to compensate an inferior structure by active piece play. But this is here comes a very instructive moment in the game, because the next I mean, here first Smyslov plays queen b3, so this is a nice move. He puts some pressure on d5, threatening, for example, knight bishop takes f6, queen takes, and knight d5. So this is the first moment when Kerez has to be worried about the d5 pawn, because he doesn't want to take with a pawn on f6, so he plays bishop e7. And this is a very instructive moment, because with two simple and very good moves, two simple and very good moves, Smyslov managed to already achieve a clear advantage. So I suggest you to pause the video and try to find how white played in this position. Well, after bishop e7, black has a clear idea of knight e4 to exchange the bishops and also to put the knight on an active square. So first, Smyslov eliminates this knight. He plays bishop takes f6. And this is a good operation, because a good positional operation, because besides preventing the knight from jumping to e4, he also leaves black with a not so active piece here, because this bishop, it's always being neutralized by white's structure. So this dark squared bishop doesn't offers good prospects for black, because it's not particularly active in this position. And after bishop takes f6, he continues with bishop b5, another very strong move. So the point is that at the end, after all, Kerez is not able to avoid an inferior structure, which was his main goal with knight g6, bishop d7, bishop takes c6, this stuff. Because if he takes on b5, then one of his pawns will be immediately lost. And if he allows the exchange on c6, which is the lesser evil, he will get the typical structure that is aimed by white in this line. So it's very nice to see how Smyslov is able to exploit the exchanges in his favor in this game. And we should say that understanding the power of exchanges, when to find good exchanges and which pieces to keep on the board and which pieces you want off the board, this is a very important positional quality that any strong player should develop. And I strongly recommend you to carefully study Smyslov's games, because he was a master on understanding how to use the exchanges in his favor. He was a very strong player. He had a very, very subtle feeling to this kind of positional decision here, and this is the proof. He exchanges two pair of pieces, and suddenly we see that white has a very good advantage. Because the game continued with queen d6, rook f1, and now Kerez felt already obligated to look for active play. So he plays h5, which is not really a good move, and it will create new problems for black later, but It's also hard to give him any better advice because his position is already bad, is already strategically bad. So Smyslov played knight e2. I like this move, cleaning the c file, then h4, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and queen a4. And here comes the point that I mentioned a few moves earlier, because queen a4 is already attacking c6, so Kerez plays knight e7, but now comes rook b7. And also queen a6 was very strong here, fixing the a7 pawn. But the point is that after rook b7, we can see that black has many weaknesses in his camp. Besides the weak pawn on c6, also a7. And that's why I said before that it was probably better for him to play where it was here after b4 instead of bishop d6, to play a6 first. Because after a4, white renews the idea of b5, but he will have one less weak pawn in the future. As the game goes, we see that this was very good for white because the queen wouldn't have the... To start with, the queen wouldn't have the a4 square without this pawn on a7 because the rook would be with the open a file. And the main point is that black wouldn't have one more weak pawn here on a7. So that's why black's position is very difficult to defend here, because he doesn't has only one weakness. He has two weaknesses, which makes his defensive task much harder. So he plays a5, and now h3 was very good, fixing the pawn on h4. Then here Kerez tried to relieve the pressure by means of rook e2 b8, but rook c b1, rook takes, and yeah, black's position is still very annoying, very unpleasant. He cannot exchange another pair of rooks because of the pawn hanging on a5. And it's very difficult to suggest any constructive plan for black. On the other hand, white can play, for example, knight f4, knight d3, and he will have access to c5 or knight f2 e5 to increase the pressure on c6. The rook is very active on the 7th rank, and also the a5 pawn is always attacked. So all white's pieces are well coordinated and on active places, active squares. Kerez tried to open his position. I mean, he tried to activate this bishop and also get rid of the pawn by means of c5, but after a very precise move here, rook b5, immediately exploiting the drawback of this advance, which is the weakened b5 square, c takes d4, knight e2 d4. The position has only improved for white, because now the rook is also attacking the pawn on a5, and the d5 pawn became isolated. And another detail is that after rook c8, trying to get some counterplay on the c file, Smyslov simply plays knight b3, controlling the c1 square, and now black is losing more or less by force one pawn. So after bishop c3, he plays queen takes h4, taking that pawn which advanced a few moves ago. Of course, not knight takes e5 because there is mate on the first rank. But then went queen takes h4, then rook c4, and here Smyslov makes a very precise decision of playing g4, because this move at first sight looks a bit risky. We should never advance pawns in the front of our king without thinking very well, but the pawn is safe on g4, and most importantly, he vacates he frees the g2 square for this king, so this already stops any ideas intended by black with back rank threats. For example, if queen g5, then a4, knight b d4 is already bad, because after bishop takes, knight takes is mate. So white has to play e takes d4, but the rook can be active anyway on the 7th rank. Well, the game went g4, then a4, knight b d4, bishop takes, knight takes, now there is no mate. Queen e5, but now knight f3, queen d6, rook a5, and white's position is very well coordinated. He is a pawn up and is still attacking another weak points on black's position, threatening ideas like rook a8. So Kerez went back with the rook c8, but now rook takes a4, and this is two clear pawns up, and this Smyslov converted without problems. Here he finished even winning more material. d4, rook takes, rook a4, and the a4. So there's nothing here for black, If rook takes a4, the easiest path should be I don't know, something like rook d8, knight f8, and queen takes f7 is a pretty finish. King takes knight e5, regaining the queen. If queen e7, knight takes 6, defending the rook. So yeah, the game Kerez resigned after a4 because he's 3 pawns down and without counterplay, so totally lost. Well, I think this is a very nice game to understand the minority attack. Also, it shows how Smyslov was a very good player, understanding and evaluating exchanges in critical moments. And it's an instructive game that I always show to my students, but mainly for the d4 players. But I think it's useful to everyone improve your understanding about exchanges, because it's a very underestimated weapon by amateur players especially. So I hope you have enjoyed the analysis. I like this game very much, and thanks for watching. See you in the next video.